Doesn't matter whether it's 350 or none. So we're being crass, but Netanyahu has always been inside our crassness to be more crass and smarter. So what I would suspect he's going to do is he's going to conduct a strike on Iran that will demonstrate to everyone he thinks what he can do, much the way he did with Hodeidah, the port of Hodeidah. He's got the legs, he's got the tanking to get his aircraft 1,800 nautical miles away. He doesn't need the kinds of things that we would have thought he needed from us because we've been sneaking tankers to him for 20 years. He's got his own tanking aircraft now. So he's going to do this. It's going to be precision. It's not going to be sustained over that long a period. And it is indeed going to hit precisely what he has said, military targets, the IRGC headquarters, maybe the Iranian regular army headquarters, maybe the Guardian Council. That's to him a military organization. It was one to Donald Trump too. And maybe some other things, maybe some of the bases or whatever, the ballistic missile sites, those sorts of things. And then he's going to come home and he's going to say, okay, I did mine and it was within the parameters you established, Lloyd and Tony. And then Iran's going to come back devastatingly. And then he's going to use that as casus belli. And all bets are off then, and he's going to expect us to be with him.
Well, in the case of being with Benjamin Netanyahu in Israel, the United States may have to contend with, I don't know if you saw the reports that Iran, the IRGC, is saying that they have a secret weapon that is more damaging than a nuclear bomb, but is in fact not a nuclear weapon. Colonel Wilkerson, what could Iran have at their disposal that would be more powerful than a nuclear weapon and one that would cause more damage than one?
They could have one that is as powerful as a small to medium yield nuclear weapon, leaves no radioactivity, and so is not contaminative in that sense, and that Russia gave them, and that travels at roughly 32,000 kilometers per hour, or about 18,000 miles an hour. It's called Avant-Garde. There are several dimensions to it. There are different ones, but that's the most formidable one. It has such a speed and such a warhead that if you hit Tehran with it, it would be roughly the effect above ground, without radioactivity, without fallout, of a 5 to 10 KT nuclear weapon. It's, in other words, a kinetic conventional weapon that is as devastating as a small yield nuclear weapon. If Putin has given him these missiles, then they have that capability. You may recall Putin demonstrated a minor example of one, not quite as fast as about a 4,500 nautical mile per hour missile, when he hit that installation that was training for NATO Ukrainians. And the first Swedish casualties, I'm told, in over a century. The Swedes got body bags coming home because there were Swedes in this installation. Killed a lot of people, destroyed the building. One missile, one conventional warhead missile. If Putin's given him those, then there are Russians on the ground probably, because it takes Russians technicians probably to launch it and guide it and do the things they have to do with it, just like it takes U.S. ones in Ukraine. And anybody who thinks we aren't there doing that is just smoking something. So that could well be if they have that kind of system from Putin and they have the Russians to operate it.
And talk about this relationship between Iran and Russia. We've heard so many rumors that go viral even on social media about Iran and Russia's military cooperation, the bolstering of Iranian air defense systems, for example. And of course, on the other side, Iran providing things like ballistic missiles to Russia. What's your assessment of this relationship, and how could it factor into this really just, it seems like an out of control escalation at this point? There was a point years ago, Colonel Wilkerson, where we might believe that there could be some kind of stabilizing of the threat of war between Iran, the U.S., and Israel. Now it seems like that is actually not possible, or maybe you disagree. But I'm curious about your assessment of this relationship between Iran and Russia and how it could factor into what I see as a spiraling conflict with Iran.
You see it correctly, I think. Let me give a little background first. If you look back at the 67 war and you look back at the 73 war, the so-called Yom Kippur War, both of which were started by Israel, the history books will be rewritten someday by decent historians. We'll know that. Both were started by Israel. They took very, very much advantage of, in the one, Sadat, and in the other one, a bunch of naive Arabs who marshaled their forces a little too slowly. But Israel started both of those wars. If you go back and you look at that, and you look at how things evolved out of that, what I think you're looking at now is Putin making, and he knows this, Putin has made a study of all of this because the Soviets were in on all of this. They were in on every aspect of both of those wars I just cited. Henry Kissinger, Richard Nixon, LBJ, the presidents in our country at those times did not hesitate. Now, some of them made some absolutely grievous errors, I think, like not doing anything about the Israelis intentionally sinking the USS Liberty in the Eastern Mediterranean. And they did it intentionally. I know they did it intentionally. I've seen the data. I've seen the real results of the commission. So those presidents cracked the whip. They cracked the whip. In the 73 war and the 67 war, they cracked the whip. Henry Kissinger got caught off guard twice in the 73 war, but he made sure he cracked the whip once he was on guard again. And they actually uploaded a nuclear weapon. They uploaded a nuclear weapon and were going to drop it, the Israelis. And that got Henry up to the point where he actually put the United States on DEFCON 2 status, which is just right next to we're going to nuclear war. Russians did the same thing, and we scared the bejesus out of Egypt. We scared Israel and everybody calmed down. We don't have people with that kind of moxie today. We don't have people with that kind of courage. Joe Biden couldn't find that courage if he searched for it for the next 100 years. So put that in perspective with what's happening today. Putin is very prudent, very pragmatic, very circumspect. He's proven that with regard to Ukraine. He didn't have to prove it to me. I knew it beforehand. So I watched him handle it all the way up to his invasion, which we forced on him. We compelled him. We in NATO compelled him to invade. He'd already told us. He demonstrated in Georgia. He took care of those 2 oblasts in Georgia that were being nasty. And he didn't. And even Saakashvili told us at the time, I was in the government. He told us at the time the Russians could have come and taken Tbilisi. They could have taken my whole country. Maybe I made an error. Then he went off and worked in Odessa for a while. Now he's, I think, working for the Ukrainians. Former president of Georgia, who my president stood in the street in Tbilisi and said, you will be a member of NATO one day. Putin then showed him what that meant. And we should have taken that as an object lesson. We should have said, oh, he'll do it even more quickly and with more greater force in Ukraine. We didn't. We went ahead and did what we did. But Putin's very circumspect. He's very calculating. And he's looked at this situation and he knows he's gaining every day on the empire. So does Xi Jinping. Together, they're gaining majorly on the empire. He doesn't want to disturb that. That's why he was in Tehran the other day. And he told the new president of Iran, I'm not going to sign our defense agreement yet. And I'm not going to sign it because I am not going to enter a war, which the defense agreement says he will, with the United States. I'm not ready. Maybe I'll sign it down the road a little ways, depending on how this crisis works out. But I am going to supply you with everything that you'll possibly need to make sure you don't go under, unless you go to war with the United States, and then all bets are off, in which case I've won big time. Because when the United States finishes that war, Iraq in 2003 will look like a candy match. It will look like a circus. Iran will be $1 trillion a year for a decade. We'll have to go to conscription. We'll have to put 2 million men and women into Iran. At the end of the 10 years, we won't have accomplished anything. We'll have a guerrilla warfare against us unparalleled, just like we did in Iraq, and we'll have to leave. And we won't have accomplished a thing except made a whole bunch of Persians really angry at us, very capable Persians who will go to a nuclear weapon and quickly. And Israel, by the way, will disappear in all of this. So that's what Putin's looking at. And he's very astute. He wants to get a leg up on the people who've embarrassed him, who've attacked him and killed hundreds of thousands of his men and women. And he understands it's NATO, and he understands it's led by the United States. And he's made a decision. In the future, if I have to fight these people, which there is a prospect of, I'm going to have bled them so badly that I won't have any problem defeating them. And that's what he's about right now. And Xi Jinping has agreed.
Yeah, I mean, especially in this case of what's happening with regard to Iran, this saber rattling, this just absolute descent into all-out war, it seems. This scenario also doesn't factor in, Colonel Wilkerson, the fact that Iran is not going to be operating on its own here. Not only do you have the Russia factor, the fact that Russia has been bolstering the Iranian side, given their relationship, of course, with all that pragmatism that you laid out there. But also you will have the rest of the axis of resistance because coming in, because what I don't think the United States understands and what Israel understands is they're not going to sacrifice Gaza and the Palestine cause. That seems to be very clear. And Iran, with Operation True Promise 2, seem to demonstrate that, yeah, no, they're not going to sit back, and not only if they're threatened, but also if there are these egregious red lines crossed across the conflict field, so to speak, especially when it comes to Palestine. What do you think about this?
Well, I don't think the Iranians, at the end of the day, really give a hang about the Palestinian Arabs. That's cruel of me to say, brutal of me to say, but I'm being cruel and brutal because I think the Persians are being very strategic. They have a habit of being that way when it comes down to brass tacks. I think what they're doing is being very fearful of having everything that they have had happen since 78, 79 and the revolution go to pot. And I'd be the first one to cheer that were it to turn into a democracy, even a barely functioning democracy like ours, for example, or like Israel's, for example, apartheid state. It's not a democracy. In fact, Iran is probably the country in the Levant, if I may stretch it a bit, that has the most democratic government of all, including Israel. My fellow Americans, especially in the Congress, would say, "Oh, you're crazy." I'd say, "Yep, well, let me prove it to you," and I could cite chapter and verse why they have more instrumentalities of democracy than we do, despite the label of theocracy that we put on them. So you're looking at a country that has 90 million people, 53% of them are Persian, and therefore there's a very large homogeneity there. You've got a lot of minorities that might go this way or that way. That's why Israel has no problem finding people they can pay to spy on Iran, because there are a lot of minorities in those big, wide borders that don't like the Persians much and don't like Tehran particularly. And so they'll take a buck and do anything they can do, include planning a shape charge on somebody's bedroom or something. So that is a problem, and Israel has exploited that for a long time. But fundamentally, you've got this very homogeneous population, as I said, 53% Persian, and probably another 20% of the 90 million or so are there. If they're put in extremists, they'll unite like we never thought they could unite if they're put in extremists. And that's what would happen. And we know that the model for the United States, Lindsey Graham, John Bolton, Tom Cotton, Josh Hawley, Chuck Schumer, Mitch McConnell, the model has been for years now what Bill Kristol and those boys produced called the clean break strategy. And that's their strategy. They want to cleanse the entire region of anyone who opposes our primacy, ultimately including Mohammed bin Salman or his descendant. We don't want anybody there who isn't a, quote, Democrat, unquote, the way we are. We want primacy there as we have primacy we think, everywhere else. Gone in East Asia, but we think we still have it. That's our strategy. Well, all these people, 400 million plus of them, are going to combat that. And at one point in time, they're going to show some reasonable unity in doing that combating. And we're going to be toast. We're going to be finished in our experiment to revolutionize and democratize. That's laughable when you think about it, the Southwest Asia. But that's our goal. That's our strategic goal. And that's what, and who's our tool in doing this? Who is our principal tool in doing this? Bibi Netanyahu in Israel. That's the truth of this whole matter in a nutshell.
That's quite the quite the tool indeed, given all that's transpired. Now, one last question before we get into a bigger picture analysis before you have to depart, Colonel Wilkerson. I was reading Thomas Friedman's latest op-ed, and it reeked of what I think exposes the U.S.'s really infantile state here, where on the one hand, he is calling on a kind of coercive diplomacy, he says, where what needs to happen is that the United States needs to force Israel to define its borders and to essentially listen to what the U.S. actually wants and to follow through with whatever the U.S.'s demands are for limiting the damage of this conflict. And on the other hand, needs to go to Iran and the rest of but really Iran, it was the focus here, and the rest of the axis of resistance, and tell them, well, if you don't do what we say, if you don't hold back, if you don't, intentionally weaken yourselves, we are going to ensure that Israel does whatever it wants with you and not only protect it, but arm it to the teeth so that it can destroy you. What do you make of this? Because this is not something that is special to Thomas Friedman. He generally speaks as a mouthpiece for bigger forces that actually control things. What do you make of this being what I see actually is a pretty accurate reflection of U.S. Foreign policy in the region at this time? And will it work? Does it work?
Let me preface my remarks with this little little vignette. I was leaving Beijing, I think it was in 2009, but don't hold me to that year. My memory's not good anymore. After a major exercise in the new Ritz-Carlton in the financial district, where Microsoft and Deloitte Touche China had essentially taken over the hotel and turned it over to us to have this exercise. And I was flying back on a 747, and Tom Friedman was on it. And I knew him a little bit. I knew him from previous wars and incarnations, and we wound up talking. And one of the things I noted there on that airplane as I talked to Tom Friedman was how naive he was about China, utterly naive about China. And I thought to myself, will I ever read any one of his op-eds again? This man is just not worthy of reading. And I've sort of stuck with that. But every now and then, when Tom Friedman writes something about Israel and someone says, oh, you got to read this because he's on the other side now. He's on the other side or whatever. I always find between the lines or sometimes in the lines that he's still working for Israel, very much working for Israel, as was Dennis Ross, as is Amos Hochstein, as is Anthony Blinken, as is a host of dual citizen people, Douglas Feith, the number 3 man in the Defense Department throughout the Iraq War. The second one had Mossad in his office, Mossad agents in his office who didn't have to go through the security checks or anything else. Donald Rumsfeld once stumbled outside his office and said, I don't run this building. Israel does. He was right. Israel runs everything in this country of significant interest to them. And it does so through rich Jewish American billionaires and others who keep them out of the Foreign Agents Act because they're not foreign agents, they're American citizens. Long story there. John Mearsheimer and Steve Walt have written the book, The Israel Wally. So what do you get when you look at this from the range that I look at it from, is you understand that there are people in this country, I'll call them plants. There are people in this country who go from one side to the other side and do a jockeying act. David Ignatius is one and a host of others, but they're basically tools of Israel. I even think, and I can't prove this, and Jeremy Ben-Ami would be angry with me for saying this, but I actually think that AIPAC is the hard side and J Street is the soft side. So what the Israeli leadership has done over the years is decided that one day AIPAC will be inundated with so much criticism we'll have to shut it down. We'll have J Street, and J Street will still be very smart, very astute to do that sort of thing. So anyway, getting back to Friedman and this assessment and these sorts of things, they don't have much impact with me anymore because I know that the influence extends to our high schools, where the Israelis have people responsible for going and making sure that high school and middle school textbooks reflect properly on Israel and improperly on the Arabs in Palestine. I mean, it's incredible. That's the level and depth of their influence in this country. And I've seen this happen in my own state of Virginia. So that's a long-winded answer, but it would be very difficult for us to break away from people like Friedman. I don't even read them anymore.
Yeah. Yeah, well, it was not a quality op-ed to say the least. It simply was exactly as you said, speaking. It seemed like through the side of Israel with this attempt to paint over it as some kind of balanced assessment, when really all he was saying was the U.S. should bully Israel's opponents in order to get what the U.S. wants from Israel, which I think we've seen is not really doing very much at this moment and also likely will not work from here into the future. But I wanted to ask you, Colonel Wilkerson, about the larger impact of what's happening here, because of course we have this impending Iran strike that Israel is going to launch sometime before the election, November 5th. But, given the state of all that has been going on in West Asia, the effect it's had on U.S. influence, and of course, this larger geopolitical picture unfolding with the strengthening of BRICS and other multilateral institutions, what do you see as the largest effects of this latest iteration of conflict and war in the Middle East? Because now we're talking about something pretty historic where most of the world is talking about genocide and most of the world is looking upon things like attacks on UN peacekeeping forces by Israel, the fact that the United States continues to support Israel the way it does, and this larger multipolar world. I think the world is viewing this as another kind of flashpoint that sends a pretty big message. I'm curious on what you believe the impact of all of this will be in the end, or at least moving forward.
I'd say three things are key for me anyway. They're geopolitical, geostrategic, whatever adjective that's all encompassing you want to put on it. The first one is the deterioration of the American empire. I think it's irreversible now. I think Putin has figured that out. I think Xi Jinping has figured that out. So they don't, either one of them or together, want to give it such duress that it winds up, as Ricardo Alarcón, then the president of the Cuban National Assembly, said to me one time, Larry, even a dying elephant can thresh a lot of grass. They don't want the dying elephant to thrash a lot of grass in which they are embedded. So they're just biding their time. That's the first point. And your point about it being a multipolar world is a stark reality. Whether that's good or bad remains to be seen. So far, it's been bad because the United States has been trying every way it knows under the sun, especially with bullets, bayonets, and bombs and sanctions, to reverse that and to make it back to being a unipolar world, meaning Washington rules. Reestablishing that primacy will not be possible. That's the first point. The second point is we are avoiding an imminent threat that is going to kill us all. We have disarmed the world, we single-handedly, the empire, of all of its nuclear weapons treaties, from the anti-ballistic missile treaty, which my president, George W. Bush, abrogated overnight virtually, to the most important treaty of them all, the Intermediate Nuclear Force Treaty, which disestablished an entire class of missiles, the most dangerous class, to ultimately New START, because Putin, under the present circumstances, I don't blame him, is never going to agree to extend that. So that's the second point. We are the first empire in 5,000 years, 3,000 years of which we know a great deal about and are learning more every day through archaeology and so forth. 3,000 years we know a lot about. We are the first empire of the hundreds upon hundreds in that sweep of millennia to have the technical means to destroy ourselves. Others, the Eastern or Western Roman, the Persian, the Mongol, the Mughal, the Ottoman, the British, probably would have destroyed themselves had they had the means, but they didn't have the means. Today we have the means, and we still have the probability. The third thing is, looming on the horizon, not so far away at all, is the climate crisis, which is also going to eat all our lunches and destroy us, maybe the whole human race. Earth's still going to be here. It's going to burn out in the sun in 4.5 billion years or whatever, but we aren't going to be on it. And we aren't paying any attention to any of that.
Well, what's so interesting is that these endless wars, Colonel Wilkerson, only make the destruction of the natural environment that much worse. The U.S. has, of course, accounted for nearly $1 trillion in investment in this endless war machine, but of course, it's many more trillions than that unaccounted for.
And we're the biggest polluter in the world.
Exactly, and it's the biggest.
And the global South knows that.
Yes, it does, and of course, there's this a reality too, Colonel Wilkerson. You mentioned as well the ability to destroy oneself that the United States possesses with nuclear weapons, but it also appears that now we have another flashpoint. You know, with Russia, it's gotten to this point over the Ukraine conflict where we are closer to nuclear war than we've ever been with Russia, perhaps.
And in
now,
Gaza too.
Yes, that's what I was going to say. And now Gaza and this larger West Asia regional war is also proliferating. And then you have China, which is also a nuclear power, and the United States has not stopped. I mean, it has not stopped its build up toward a conflict in the future, a kinetic conflict with China in the future. So, Colonel Wilkerson, perhaps you can speak to this nuclear threat, maybe beginning with West Asia, because this is the one I think most people don't really understand as a threat as much, perhaps, as the other flashpoints.
Well, if you're including Pakistan and India in it, of course, that's been the point that I had most personal interest in 2002, for example, when my boss raced off to Islamabad to lecture Pervez Musharraf, then president and general in Pakistan, and the deputy rushed off to New Delhi to lecture them. We came very close to a nuclear war there. But I think you're probably pointing more pointedly at the possibility that Iran will be compelled to build a nuclear weapon. I think Saudi Arabia will execute its contract with Islamabad and have 30 warheads overnight. I do think that contract exists. I think Mohammed bin Salman gave Islamabad $20 billion for that contract. And so Saudi Arabia will be another power. Little Sparta, United Arab Emirates, they're going to get one too. They probably have a contract with Islamabad also. This is all a hangover from the AQ Khan network. The father of the atom bomb in Pakistan is not dead in that sense. So you're going to have, instead of 9 nuclear weapon owning states, you're going to have 11 or 12 overnight, 3 very dangerous ones, including Israel, probably the most dangerous of all, in the Levant, in Southwest Asia. So you're looking at a recipe for not just Ukraine and what you mentioned for the potential there, Netanyahu getting in an existential situation and uploading another nuclear weapon, just like they did in 73, and using it. And you're looking at this proliferation. Not a good picture, not a good picture at all. And again, as you intimated, no one is really paying, in the nuclear weapons sense, no one's really paying a whole lot of attention to it.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. And I wanted
let me just add,
yes.
One of the first things I would do if I were king for a day and could start a new nuclear weapons regime would be to drag Israel kicking and screaming into the non-proliferation treaty and into the regime. And I would tell them that if they didn't declare instantly how many they had and what types and so forth, and put every one of them in this new treaty regime, that they were gone. Forget it. You'll get not another penny from the United States of America, because that's one of the most important things that they mess up every day that we pay no attention to.
Yeah, I mean, that is to me one of the most shocking parts about this. It's almost like this dirty little secret that Israel has, where it is sitting on top of a nuclear stockpile, and I've covered this in the Jerusalem Post. I'm sure there are many other articles like this, but recently in the Jerusalem Post, they've been talking about, as there was this possibility of Iran striking Israel again, before Operation True Promise 2. What the Israeli side was saying was, well, maybe we need to be more open about our capabilities, not in terms of what you're talking about, Colonel Wilkerson, about, well, how much do we have?
Yeah.
Should we report it? Should we join non-proliferation? No, but rather as saying, no, we have them. We're not going to tell you how many. We're not going to, but let's just say we have them, and we're going to use them if we want to against you. That was really what was being said. So I guess your thoughts on this kind of posture, because generally this dirty little secret has been entirely a secret, because Israel does a lot of things entirely in secret.
Right.
Whenever something, as you said, missiles, whenever drones hit Israel, whenever casualties are had on the Israeli side, whenever Israel does something absolutely horrific in Syria or elsewhere, Gaza, they say, oh, we don't know yet if we've done it. We don't know. Maybe we've done it. No, we didn't do it. But here they seem to be saying, well, we have nuclear weapons and we might use them against you. That seems to be perhaps I don't know if it's an eminent policy prescription on the Israeli side, but there's contemplation about it. So I'm curious on your thoughts about this.
Well, they scare me. They scare me really, more so than Putin or any other nuclear weapon state in the world. Even India and Pakistan now seem to have learned their lessons. They didn't even have permissive action locks on their weapons. We had to tell them, hey, you got these things you put on there, 2 keys, takes 2 people. Musharraf was later in Powell's office, and he was talking to him about other things, and they got to talking about that incidentally. And he said, thank you for coming. We learned a lot. We also taught them escalation theory. And if you shoot 20, what do you think they'll do? Well, they'll shoot 20 back. No, they'll shoot 100 back. Well, then we'll shoot 150 back. Yeah, that's what we mean by escalation theory. So I think it's the scariest thing in the nuclear world, that we see Netanyahu for what he really is now, a beast, and that he owns nuclear weapons. That's scary. That's very scary.